How are you guys? I hope you will be okay. So in today's session, I'm going to talk of the difference between liberal feminism as well as the radical feminism. For your own convenience and considering your examination requirement, I'm going to talk of certain points. Then I'm going to link with the liberal feminism and radical feminism. So that content is going to help you out in making some sort of a comparison. So even you're going to attempt this question in a matrix, so that would be more convenient for you guys, okay? And the second thing is when you're talking the liberal and radical feminism, so before starting this question, you need to have understanding of feminism, that these two types of feminism, basically they were in the favor of women empowerment. They were having their own strategy, their own mechanism through which women they could be empowered in society, and what could be the approach through which women they can't feel more discriminated in society, and they are no more considered in as an oppressed entity in society. So that was the entire purpose, but entirely the goal was just women empowerment, but strategy was a different. Okay, so the first difference between the liberal and radical feminism was on the basis of the belief. Liberal feminism was of the view that women they could be empowered, and that empowerment could only be done when you are going to bring reform within the existing system. And the radical feminism was of the view that reforms could not work out for women empowerment, so you have to replace the existing system with the new system, and the new system is going to provide more opportunities to women. Later on I'm going to have more discussion what do you mean by this system, existing system, things like this. Okay, so the first difference that you have to bring reform within the existing system, and the radical feminism was of the view that you have to rather than thinking and rather than just wasting time in bringing reforms, you have to replace the existing system with the new system. And the second difference in terms of the approaches to gender equality, that how gender equality could be achieved in society. So liberal feminism was of the view that it could be done in a gradual way, because you have to bring reforms, and when you go for reforms, obviously it takes time, and in a gradual way you're going to achieve your objective, where women they're going to be given equality in society and they're going to be considered equal to men. When you're talking of the radical feminism, since radical feminism was not going to support bringing reforms in society, it was in the favor of replacing the existing system with the new one. So that's why it was going to support the revolutionary mechanism rather than just supporting the gradual way through which women they could be empowered in society. The third difference was in terms of the focus, because liberal feminism was of the view that when you're talking of empowerment, so it could be done when you are relying on your individual struggle. Individual struggle means that if an issue is going to affect a particular female, so that female needs to resist independently. So the individual struggle could be considered as a more key strategy in terms of the empowerment. When you're talking about the radical feminism, so radical feminism was not in the favor of individual struggle, that was more in the favor of collective struggle. That, for example, if an issue is going to affect two females, and if one female is going to show more resistance and second female is going to accept the oppression, so it means that could not work out, and unless all women they're going to be taken on board and collectively they are going to resist for their equality and they're going to resist the oppression, only then they are going to bring reforms in the system, and consequently they would be empowered in society. So when you talk the fourth difference between the liberal feminism and radical feminism, that is more pertinent to patriarchy. Liberal feminists, they were of the view that patriarchy could be ended by bringing a change within the system. And when you're talking of the radical feminism, so radical feminists of the view that a patriarchy can't be ended by bringing reforms in society, so patriarchy needs to be dismantled. Okay, so that was basically the main difference when initially I was going to talk of that the radical feminists, they were of the view that rather than just thinking on this direction, that you have to go for certain reforms, which is a better, that you have to replace the existing system with the new one. So what was the existing system? That was a patriarchal system. Patriarchy means a male dominant society where decisions are going to be taken by men, and all the powers that is going to be exercised by men. So that was a fourth difference in terms of patriarchy. So whether a patriarchy that could be whether the reforms could be made within the patriarchy or whether the patriarchy needs to be replaced with the new system. The fifth difference was in terms of intersectionality. In liberal feminism, intersectionality may not be considered more important. For example, when you say what are the various class factors, sex factors, and you could talk of ethnic factors as well, and then you could link with the class factors as well, that how these factors, they are going to contribute to oppression of women. And they were just thinking on the system, that the system is not going to provide equal opportunities, and they were focusing more on the legal mechanism. So intersectionality might not consider important under liberal feminists. But when you're talking of the radical feminism, so radical feminists, they were absolutely in the favor of intersectionality, that these are the factors on the basis of which women, they're going to be oppressed in society. So that's why it is very essential that you have to replace the existing system with the new one. So they were going to give more weightage, and they're going to give more due attention to intersectionality as well. Then you could talk of the sexuality, the difference between liberal and radical feminism on the basis of sexuality. So liberal feminists, they were going to support heterosexuality. I told you earlier that liberal feminists were of the view that you can have equality. Women, they could be made equal to men, but it could be done in a gradual way, and you have to bring reforms in society. And the existing system, when you're talking of the patriarchy, so that was in the favor of heterosexuality as well. So they were believing that yes, heterosexuality, it could be followed, and it could be strengthened, and there should be no resistance against heterosexuality. So it could be okay. But when you're talking of the radical feminists, so radical feminists, they were not going to support heterosexuality. They were believing sex remains the fundamental cause of women's oppression. And overall, they're going to be considered as a problem. Women, they have to understand that this is the root cause for women's exploitation. Sex is you can say that basically, it is a site through which men, they're going to feel themselves more empowered. And again, when you're talking of sexuality, basically what was in their mind, you know very well that when you're talking of heterosexuality, that is a straight sexuality. At the same time, when you're talking of the nature of sexuality, so it could be considered active versus passive. Active sexuality is going to get associated with the man, and the passive sexuality, that is going to be linked with women. And again, when you're talking of the nature of active sexuality, that is going to be considered more aggressive sexuality. And when you're talking, although it is a socially constructed roles, reality could be different, but generally when you're talking of active versus passive, so at the same time you're going to talk of aggressive versus submissive sexuality. And submissive sexuality, mostly that is going to be associated with the women. So when you believe that it meant they're aggressive, so being aggressive, and when you're talking of aggression, so being aggressive, you remain more unkind, you remain more unfriendly, and you're going to treat your partner as your enemy. So this is one of the reasons that radical feminists were of the view that sex remains the fundamental cause of women's oppression. Because when men, they're going to exploit women, only then they're going to consider themselves more powerful, and this is something through which they're going to drive more pleasure as well. The next difference, that was point number 6, in terms of activism, that how it could be done, what could be the approach in terms of making women more active in society. Liberal feminists were of the view that women, they could be more active in society by bringing change in your own legal system. So it could be done through the policy initiatives. When you're talking of the radical feminism, so radical feminists, they were of the view that women, they could be made more active in society when the existing system could be replaced with the new system. And what should be the new system? In the new system, obviously, there should be more resistance to patriarchy, and the new system that is not going to support heterosexuality, because heterosexuality is going to protect the interests of men. So that could be the only solution, and it could be done by giving more, you could talk of more awareness, by having more consciousness, and by having more collective approach, group struggle, that could be considered more requisite for women empowerment. The next difference between the liberal and radical feminism, that was on the point of, you can talk of the economic perspective. So liberal feminists were of the view that women, they need to be empowered, and women, they need to be given access to public roles as well. But when you're talking about the radical feminists, so they were of the view that this is not enough, and it is not sufficient that if you're going to take female to public place, but at the same time you have to offer certain more, you could say, leadership roles, and certain top positions they could be offered to women. So not necessarily by giving access to the public roles, it doesn't mean women, they are going to feel themselves more empowered. So it means they need to be recruited for certain mid-level and high-level positions as well, and they have the same potential to lead the society from leadership perspective as well. Okay, then you could talk of the point number 8 in terms of the what could be the reason for gender inequality. So liberal feminists were of the view that the overall inequality, it could be linked with the legal factors. For example, you could talk of why women, they're not going to be accepted in police service, and why women, they're not going to be accepted for certain field work as well, why women, they're going to be oppressed in terms of wages equality, and in certain professions women, they're not going to be promoted to the higher level as well. So it means all the lacuna which are existing, they could be linked with the legal side as well. And liberal feminists, they were of the view that you have to bring reform within the legal scope, and within the legal parameters, and that could be considered more essential. But when you're talking of the radical feminists, so radical feminists were of the view that rather than linking with the legal side, it is better that you have to link with the patriarchal side. That this is the men's psyche, that they are not going to consider women equal, and all the time men believe that they are superior and women, they are inferior. Since they are going to treat women as their property, and they are going to consider them irrational. So this is the reasons on the basis of which women, they're not going to be accepted as a leader. They're not going to be accepted for certain field work as well. And they're not going to be accepted in terms of wages parity. They're not going to be granted more level playing opportunities in terms of empowerment. So rather than just linking with the legal reform, you have to understand some sort of the social perspective on the basis of which women, they're going to be exploited in society. The next difference was in terms of that could be on the point of institution of marriage. So liberal feminists were in the favor of institution of marriage, because I told you they were going to support the heterosexuality, and they were in the favor of bringing reform within the existing system. And not necessarily, it couldn't be linked with the Sigmund Freud theory, the penis envy, you know very well. So they were of the view that irrespective of having all the debates, not necessarily, because women have certain women, they could be linked on the basis of penis envy theory, that they are going to support heterosexuality. That might not be the reason, but overall it is something that is more essential in terms of continuity of your own generation. But when you're talking of the radical feminists, so radical feminists, they were categorically opposed to institution of marriage. They were believing that this marriage institution is going to support certain gender roles on the basis of which women, they're going to be exploited, and men, they're going to be considered as a master of the women. So that heterosexuality needs to be opposed. And that heterosexuality could be ended. The only mechanism and the only approach, the only, you could say, the way forward through which women, they could exploit, they could avoid heterosexuality, that is by avoiding and by showing more resistance to the institution of marriage. Remember one thing, when they believe that women, they should not support the heterosexuality, you should not get confused just with the institution of marriage. So they were believing that women, they have to show more resistance to heterosexuality. It could be done even with the institution of marriage, and it could be done even in your own civil partnership as well. So whatever the sexuality is, but there should be no heterosexuality, because heterosexuality results in women exploitation because of aggressive versus submissive sexuality. Okay, and the point number 11, that was more related with the reproductive freedom. So liberal feminists, since liberal feminists were of the view that yes, you have to go for certain social reforms, and it could be done in a gradual way. At the same time, when you're talking of the reproductive rights, so yes, certain reforms, it could be welcomed, and by bringing reforms within the reproductive rights, women, they're going to feel themselves more empowered. When you're talking of the radical feminists, so radical feminists, since they were against the heterosexuality, they were against the institution of marriage, so we are not going to talk, they were not just focusing on the reproductive freedom. Basically, they were more focusing on the bodily autonomy, and this is something that is going to even get supported by the United Nations as well. There should be some sort of bodily autonomy, and we are going to have another lecture, another session on the bodily autonomy. What does it mean? But they were more supporting bodily autonomy rather than just focusing on just, you could talk of reproductive freedom. Okay, the next point was in terms of the social change, that liberal feminists were of the view that yes, you have to bring reforms, and it could be done in a gradual way, and ultimately by bringing a social change in a gradual way, women, they're going to feel themselves more empowered. And how you could talk of bringing change when you're going to address the issue of identity, because historically women, they were going to be considered as a sexual object, and there were the certain words which could be linked with the women, for example cougar, then you could talk of vixen. So it means women, they were going to be considered as a sexual object, and they were going to consider as an entity for man's sexual desire. So they were in the favor of bringing change within the identity, and ultimately that is going to feel women more empowered. But when you're talking of the radical feminists, so radical feminists, they were talking that it is useless when you're talking of the gradual change in the system and you're going to change the mindset, but you have to replace the existing system with the new one, because whatever you're going to exert your effort in order to bring change within the existing system, it is useless, because the foundation is wrong. And when you're talking of constructing a building on misfit foundation, so it can't sustain for a longer period of time. So for women empowerment, there are more level playing opportunities. It is very essential that you have to build a system on good foundation, and could only be done when you are going to eliminate patriarchy. The next, if you're talking of some supporters of the liberal and radical feminists, so liberal feminists, like you could talk of Joan Stuart Mill, Harriet Taylor, so they were the liberal feminists. When you're talking of the radical feminists, so you can talk of Simone de Beauvoir, and you could talk of Shulamit Firestone as well. And the last difference, it could be in terms of the who was a liberal feminist. If you're talking of certain personalities in Pakistan, so you could talk of even Malala Yousafzai as well. Then you could link even Sharmeen Obaid, because even she received 2 documentaries as well. That is also part of your syllabus, but we're going to have another session as well. So they are going to be considered as a liberal feminist. When we're talking of the radical feminists, so in radical feminists, even you could talk of certain personalities as well, but on the other side, you could talk of certain movements as well, like the Bata Chalo movement, that was in 1980s during Zia regime, and then you could talk of Aurat March that was going to get started from 2018 from Karachi, and every year Aurat March is going to be practiced regularly on an annual basis as well. Okay, so I hope it's clear between the liberal feminism as well as the radical feminism. I didn't go into the deeper details, but I was just focusing on the main points, that how liberal feminism and the radical feminists, they are going to get distinguished on the same points. So I hope it would be more clear, but still, if you have any confusion, please feel free to comment. Thank you.